Now, this it's interesting because after Muhammad Yunus won the Nobel Prize, and after it was seen, after the virtues of the bank were extolled by people like Bill Clinton and others, there have been attempts to replicate what the Grameen Bank does, most notably in India and in Latin America, but in Mexico in particular. How are these banks, which have come under a lot of criticism, different from Grameen Bank?
Well, especially the ones that have gone public, they're out for profit maximization, and that worries me. That seems more that it's just about money lending. And
so it's about money lending and making money off of poor people.
Yeah. And it was interesting. I went to the microcredit summit, so I got to see different aspects of that. There are some groups in India that say they're lending at a lower rate than the money lenders, but still at more profitability, and they had no problem saying, well, we're just offering a service. They weren't out to help the poor necessarily. So I think it's like the term organic, where everybody started saying, oh, we're organic. But what is organic? We needed a regulation system. So I believe with microcredit, we also need a regulation system to say what is good microcredit and what is bad microcredit. And I'd actually like to call it social microcredit, just like he terms social business, which is not for profit maximization. I'd like to see it called social microcredit, just to...
There was an interesting interview that just came out today on the day we're doing this interview, February 13th, 2012, from Mumbai, where Muhammad Yunus took a stand saying that microfinancing institutions are not a way or should not be a way of making money out of the poor. It's interesting because he, in many ways, straddles an interesting line. He is a proponent of money making for the poor, but it's sort of small scale. He talks about capitalism in the small scale, and so I want to ask you about this term social business that we talked about. Social business almost sounds like sort of a paradoxical term.
Yes, it's interesting.
I mean, businesses can be social.
Yeah. In fact, I think our mindset now is non-profit and for-profit.
Right.
And this idea...
It's nothing in between.
Yeah, and right now, so there's this little burgeoning idea of social business, and I want to see it grow, where right now we have a lot of non-profits that actually have business, like Goodwill is a type of a social business. It's a non-profit, but it makes money on the shops and gives back.
It sustains itself.
Yeah.
That way. I mean, KPFK is a non-profit business.
Yeah. So I think it's going to open people's minds, and that's what's exciting to me, to be like, right now we have rules and laws in this country that if a company is public, they have to be profit maximizing or their shareholders could sue them.
So how does a poor person make money at a small scale? When we're talking about a poor woman in Bangladesh who wants to be able to buy one cow and sell that cow's offspring to buy a house. So we're not talking about building financial empires here, nor are we talking about she shouldn't have to be forced to open a nonprofit to be able to sustain herself.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing. It's like there's room for nonprofits, there's room for social businesses, and there's room for profit. But the idea that business should always be profit maximizing is what Yunus is really trying to open our minds to. And because right now the greed has gotten so out of control. That's why we have the Occupy movements. People are taking to the streets and the Supreme Court decision that corporations could spend unlimited amounts. It's all just out of whack in this country.
My guest is Holly Mosher. We're talking about her latest film, Bonsai People, the vision of Muhammad Yunus. Now, the government of Bangladesh itself has also been critical, at least under its current leadership, been critical of Muhammad Yunus. Is it true that he has been now forced into retirement, or were those rumors?
He was forced to retire, but he is currently now appealing that decision again. Right. There is an age that you have to retire at the age of 60 if you're a bank worker, and he tried to actually retire at 61, but his board of directors said, no, we want you to stay. So this is now 11 years later. He's 71, so 10 years after this all, the age of 60, the government decided to go after him, which is just strange.
Well, the Prime Minister seems seems to have a bit of a bone to pick with Yunus. His profile seems to have outshone, almost every Bangladeshi's profile in the world. He's the most famous Bangladeshi living today.
Yes.
So is he sort of seen as a threat to the government, or being able to provide opportunities that the government can't?
He did consider running for office in 2007, so I think that may have been when this started. Actually, when I was spending time there in 2007, 2008, both foreign prime ministers were in exile on charges of corruption. And Bangladesh has a history of being one of the most corrupt countries in the world.
The Transparency International's corruption index for Bangladesh is 134, and that's out of 178 countries.
Yeah, and when I started the film, I think it was at 168, and I have a feeling it's going to go back up.
Now, let's talk about some of the other aspects to the Grameen Bank that I think bolster its functionality as a social business or social microcredit business, as you were trying to allude to, which is that they've gotten into the arena of health and of education, as well as renewable energy. So let's start with health first. There are health clinics now that the borrowers of the Grameen Bank have access to?
Yes, in fact, they have 54 clinics in operation now, and they're covering 90% of their costs. And just like I said, most of the people that couldn't pay back had health issues. So he saw, just like the women lacked access to financial services, they lacked access to health care, they lacked access to education, they lacked access to energy. So he saw that there was a great need that these families had, and he could fulfill them with businesses.
So and it's so interesting to hear about a bank getting into this aspect. Again, it goes back to the question of nonprofit versus for-profit, and there being just these two models, because here in the United States, our answer to health care for the poor who can't afford it is to start nonprofit clinics or to have charities, which are then reliant on the donors.
Right.
In this case, these health clinics are also self-sustaining?
They're almost self-sustaining. Their eye care clinics are, where they're performing cataract operations, because they charge more for the people who can afford more. But the health clinics actually offer insurance for a family of 7 for $1 a month. So they're really thinking of new solutions. And then they also have mobile devices for the pregnant women, so the health technicians can go into the field and do a test on something like a cell phone, and they're even creating ultrasounds that the image can get through the cell phone to the doctors in Dhaka, and they're not having
the capital.
They're not having the picture of the baby because they don't want to have any of the people choose to abort if it's a girl.
Right.
But they
Female
can
infanticide, right?
So he's really thinking about all these things and trying to offer solutions to people.
So then there's education. One of the young girls profiled in your film had a Grameen scholarship.
Yes, the bank offers scholarships itself, but then they also have Grameen Shika, which is their education program, which offers pre-K and K. It offers technical training, it offers scholarships and loans, and it offers training to the women.
Also, renewable energy, and this was a really interesting thing, because when we think about businesses and capitalism, even at the micro level, for societies poor to really start making money, we're talking about an increase in energy consumption, which will necessarily destroy the environment unless there is a very concerted effort to have this growth at the small scale be accompanied by renewable energy.
Yes.
So tell us about this initiative, and was that the reason why Mohammed Yunus was going into this field of renewable energy?
Yes, I mean, when he started, 70% of the country had no electricity, and just like we appreciate electricity for all the convenience, and it's hard to, it really improves
to
people's
do this
lives.
Radio interview.
Everything. It improves their lives. But he is an environmentalist and cares about the planet. And so he specifically is doing biogas. So there are families that have a few cows, and then they have a biogas that gives them fertilizer, totally organic fertilizer, and gas to fuel their stoves.
And solar panels as well.
And solar panels.
So, when we think of explosive growth, we think of China, we think of countries that with, high populations like Bangladesh, very high highly populated country, that it seems as though the only choices are let the poor stay poor versus let the entire country get rich and trash the planet.
Right.
So this is a sort of, again, one of these more thoughtful approaches.
Yeah, that's what's so exciting about it, especially right now when people are aware that we're beyond capacity in the world for how many people, and if we are all living at our level, standard of living. But there are, I've seen these alternative solutions in practice, so it's going to really open up the dialogue.
I'm speaking with Holly Mosher, filmmaker. She is the director and producer of Bonsai People, a vision of Muhammad Yunus. We'll tell you where you can catch the film in just a minute. But let's talk about the name of the documentary, Bonsai People. It's not a term that I've found is very common in Bangladesh, or even necessarily a hobby. When we think of bonsai, we think of what? Japan.
Yeah.
Where does it come from?
It really excited me when I read some of his second book. I think that's where he mentioned that poor people are bonsai people. They have the full potential to be the big, beautiful tree, but their roots have been potted. And that just really hit me from seeing the people. I mean, I was seeing the stunted growth from the malnourishment. The people I was filming were eating mostly rice, and they were tiny, whereas like if they'd fed their son more, he was taller. And so you could see that it wasn't genetic, it was just the malnutrition. So it really hit on so many levels that if they have financial services, if they have healthcare, if they have education, we can all flourish in this world.
Did you see any issues, any problems? And actually, I should ask you, what happens when somebody can't pay back a loan?
Well, they kind of first go to a flexible plan where they have a longer turnaround rate, which would have been great with the mortgage crisis here if we'd just given people a few more years on their mortgage payment.
So unlike a traditional bank, they account for the sort of problems that people encounter?
Yes, they work with the people because the borrowers own the bank, so it's not in their interest to get rid of people off the system. But then if people really can't, then they write it off. I didn't see any pressuring when people didn't want to take another loan for a while, like Melancho in my film. She was pregnant, so it wasn't a good time for a new loan. There was no pressure. And then Aisha, who did struggle and couldn't pay back, she just fell off the system.
So she wasn't penalized, she wasn't kicked into debtor's prison.
No.
So she just basically chose to go her own way and do something else.
Yeah, and they just write it off eventually.
So there is a measure of debt forgiveness written into the bank.
Yes.
Well, finally, Holly Mosher, how much of a threat is the Grameen Bank's model to corporate capitalism? I noticed the New York Times didn't have the kindest review of your film. They felt it was too glowing.
It's interesting because...
And then they linked to criticism of this model, but the article they linked to was about the for-profit models that have been the spin-offs of Grameen Bank.
Yeah, that's why, like I mentioned, the whole idea of the organic and the microcredit, and we need regulation. And they didn't even mention that he's appealing his own case, whereas the LA Times noticed that. So... it's interesting because I feel like I showed realistic. I showed Shanaz at first failing with eggplants, but then trying something else. So I felt like I was really realistic to what was happening and that most people do succeed.
So do you think that this is a model that corporate capitalism, greed-based capitalism feels threatened by?
Actually, I don't. In fact, a lot of business people, I feel like this is a film that speaks to the middle, to all sides of the aisle. In fact, I was interviewed in Rotarian magazine, and that's all business people. They get excited about the idea, just like the progressives. It's kind of
even having debt forgiveness built into it. I mean, because that's considered anathema, right?
I think there's room for it all. Just like a lot of people, give to nonprofits and support that idea. So I think this new idea, I think there's definitely room for it.
So it's appealing to people's humanity.
Yeah.
Well, Holly Mosher, I wish you the best of luck with the film, and thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much.